On December 17, 2022, Detroit, Michigan experienced one of its coldest winter evenings when Detective Francis Jones, a 15-year veteran of the Detroit Police Department, drove home after completing his shift. The snow fell heavily across the city's east side as Jones pulled into the driveway of his modest two-story house on Marlborough Street at approximately 8:43 p.m. That evening, as Detective Jones inserted his key into the front door lock, he noticed it was already slightly ajar. According to later testimony, he initially assumed his wife, Letitia, a 38-year-old elementary school teacher, had forgotten to secure it properly. The moment he pushed the door open, Jones stepped into a dark hallway with a distinct metallic smell. His hand reached for the light switch. The illumination revealed a horrifying scene. A trail of blood led from the entrance through the living room. Letitia Jones lay face down by the coffee table, her body riddled with bullets. Several shell casings were scattered across the hardwood floor. Detective Jones reportedly called out for his daughter, Shanice, before rushing upstairs. In Shanice's bedroom, the 12-year-old girl was found deceased in her bed. The medical examiner would later determine she had been shot 3 times while likely sleeping, the perpetrator using a pillow to muffle the gunshots. A Detroit Tigers poster hung above her bed, and homework papers remained spread across her desk. At 8:51 p.m., before Jones could process the scene or call for assistance, tactical officers from the Internal Affairs Division breached the house from multiple entry points. Led by Lieutenant Marcus Washington, the team had been conducting surveillance on Jones for 6 months. They immediately detained the detective, who reportedly appeared genuinely shocked and distraught. "I didn't do this. What happened to my family?" Jones repeatedly shouted as officers secured him in handcuffs. The search of the Jones residence, conducted under warrant number DPD-2022-4671, uncovered 3.8 kilograms of prohibited substances and $217,000 in cash hidden in a false wall in the basement. Forensic technicians determined the murder weapon was Jones's service Glock 19, which contained his fingerprints and residue consistent with recent firing. Ballistics confirmed the bullets recovered from both victims matched this weapon. The investigation revealed troubling connections between Detective Jones and the Red Hyenas drug cartel. Financial records showed unexplained deposits totaling $436,000 over 3 years into offshore accounts linked to Jones. Text messages recovered from a burner phone found in his vehicle contained communications with Miguel Scorpion Ramirez, a high-ranking cartel member, discussing police operations and payoff schedules. A key piece of evidence came from automatic license plate readers on Marlborough Street, which recorded Jones's unmarked police vehicle entering the neighborhood at 8:27 p.m., 16 minutes before he claimed to have arrived home. This created a window of opportunity during which prosecutors argued Jones murdered his family. The trial began on March 8, 2023, at the Wayne County Circuit Court under Judge Harold Bennington. Despite Jones's emphatic claims of innocence and his attorney Robert Shapiro's arguments about procedural inconsistencies, the evidence appeared overwhelming. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on 2 counts of first-degree murder and various drug trafficking charges. On April 21, 2023, Judge Bennington sentenced Francis Jones to death, one of the few capital punishment cases in Michigan's judicial history due to special federal jurisdiction invoked for the drug trafficking elements of the crime. As court officers led Jones away, he turned toward the gallery where his former colleagues sat watching. "I will find the real killers. I swear on my family's grave," he shouted, struggling against his restraints. Oak Park Maximum Security Prison became Detective Francis Jones' residence on July 15, 2023. During his time at Oak Park, Jones survived 4 separate assassination attempts. The first occurred in the cafeteria when an inmate lunged at him with a sharpened plastic utensil. The second and third were coordinated attacks in the exercise yard. The fourth happened in the shower facility. Each time, the combat skills Jones had developed during 15 years of police work in Chicago's most dangerous districts kept him alive, though not unscathed. A jagged scar across his left cheekbone and a partially severed ear served as permanent reminders of these encounters. On March 9, 2024, the routine of Jones's imprisonment changed when 67-year-old Raymond Taggart was assigned to his cell. Taggart, a former accountant from Phoenix, Arizona, had been sentenced to 12 years for financial fraud totaling over $4.3 million. The slight, bespectacled man with thinning gray hair seemed out of place in maximum security. "You're Jones, right? The cop who killed his family?" Taggart asked on his first night in the cell. Jones, who had maintained his innocence throughout his trial, remained silent, as he had for months. "I know you didn't do it," Taggart continued unexpectedly. "And I know who did." Over the next 3 days, Taggart revealed his connection to a drug trafficking organization known as the Red Hyenas. For 7 years, he had managed offshore accounts for the cartel, laundering money through a complex network of shell companies. During this time, he inadvertently discovered evidence that the murder of Jones's family had been orchestrated. "You started digging too deep, Jones," Taggart explained during a quiet moment when guards were at the other end of the cell block. "That last investigation of yours, the Riverside killings, you were getting close to exposing corrupt officers, including your lieutenant, Victor Crane. He's been on Diego Esposito's payroll for years." Taggart described how Lieutenant Crane and Esposito, the leader of the Red Hyenas, had planned the murders and systematically framed Jones. They manipulated evidence, planted Jones' DNA at the crime scene, and used his service weapon in the killings while he was drugged unconscious in his car miles away. "They took your gun while you were at the department Christmas party, slipped something in your drink. The bartender works for them. When you passed out in your car, they took your weapon, committed the murders, and returned it. By the time you woke up disoriented, your family was already dead, and the frame was complete," Taggart said. On March 13, 2024, the morning after this final conversation, Raymond Taggart was found dead in their cell. The official report listed the cause as suicide by hanging using bed sheets. The surveillance monitoring system experienced a technical malfunction during the 40-minute period when Taggart allegedly took his own life. But before his death, Taggart had passed Jones a flash drive, concealed beneath his tongue during their final conversation. Jones managed to hide it in a small crevice in the concrete wall of their cell. The tiny storage device contained financial statements documenting payments from Esposito to Crane, dating back 6 years, totaling $1.7 million. It also included private communications between the two men discussing the plan to eliminate Jones and his family. With concrete evidence of his innocence and the identification of his family's true killers, Jones gained something he had lost months ago: purpose. The former detective began meticulously planning his escape from Oak Park. He leveraged his understanding of law enforcement protocols and cultivated relationships with key prisoners who had their own reasons to hate the system. Jones knew the prison's weekly transfer schedule, guard rotation patterns, and the blind spots in the facility's security system. He identified Hector Ramirez, a former electrical engineer serving 20 years for armed robbery, who had knowledge of the prison's alarm infrastructure. Another inmate, Carl Berry, had previously worked maintenance at the facility before his conviction and understood the mechanical aspects of the prison gates. According to official police reports, Jones had meticulously planned his escape for months. While working in the prison electronics workshop at Ionia Maximum Correctional Facility, he gradually accumulated materials to create a homemade electronic detonator, stealing watch batteries, copper wiring, and small electronic components over several weeks. Prison officials later discovered his workstation had been modified to conceal these items. At approximately 8:42 a.m. on that Thursday morning, as the prison transport bus traveled along Interstate 96 near Howell, Michigan, Jones activated his improvised device. The small explosion caused enough smoke and confusion to create the diversion he needed. In the ensuing chaos, he managed to overpower corrections officers James Whitaker and Samuel Peters, taking Officer Peters' service weapon before fleeing into the dense wooded area adjacent to the highway. The Michigan State Police immediately launched what would become the most extensive manhunt in the state's recent history. Governor Eleanor Mitchell authorized the deployment of additional resources, including 3 helicopter units, K-9 teams, and over 200 law enforcement personnel from various agencies. Electronic billboards across the state displayed Jones's mugshot, warning citizens about his violent history and potential danger to the public. "We are dealing with an extremely dangerous and intelligent individual," stated Michigan State Police Captain Rebecca Lawson during a press conference that afternoon. "Jones has military training, knows how to survive in difficult conditions, and has demonstrated his capacity for violence. We urge the public to remain vigilant and report any potential sightings immediately. What investigators didn't know at the time was that Jones had made contact with Keyshawn Morris, a 42-year-old auto repair shop owner operating on Detroit's eastern outskirts. Morris, who had grown up in the same Brightmoor neighborhood as Jones's deceased wife, Letitia, had always maintained Jones's innocence in the brutal murders that had shocked the community 2 years earlier. Court documents later revealed that Morris provided Jones with critical assistance: false identification papers for Marcus Johnson, $6,400 in cash, and a Glock 19 handgun with ammunition. Morris's auto repair shop on East Warren Avenue became Jones's temporary hideout. "I've known your Letitia since we were kids, brother. You would never touch her or baby Shanice," Morris told Jones, according to his later testimony. "The system failed you, but I won't." The first target on Francis's list was Judge Franklin Harrison. On March 12, 2022, Judge Franklin Harrison returned to his Georgian-style mansion in Bloomfield Hills, an affluent suburb 15 miles northwest of Detroit, Michigan. The 61-year-old jurist had spent the evening at the annual Justice for All charity gala at the Detroit Athletic Club, where he had been honored for his 20 years on the bench. At 11:42 p.m., Harrison entered through his front door, disabling his home security system with a 6-digit code. He was alone, his wife visiting their daughter in Chicago. As the judge hung his overcoat in the foyer closet, Francis emerged from the shadows of the dining room, pressing a .45 caliber pistol against Harrison's spine. "Don't make a sound, Your Honor," Francis whispered, using the judicial honorific with unmistakable contempt. Francis forced Harrison into his wood-paneled study, binding the judge's hands with plastic zip ties to his leather office chair. Harrison's eyes widened with recognition when he finally saw his captor's face. "You're Jones," Harrison stammered. "Francis Jones." 8 years, 2 months, and 14 days, Francis replied. "That's how long I spent at Chippewa Correctional Facility for a crime I didn't commit. A crime you knew I didn't commit when you sentenced me." "I want the truth," Francis demanded. "About District Attorney James Crane. About the Malone brothers. About why an innocent man was sent to prison while my family's real killers walked free." Initially, Harrison denied everything, maintaining the fiction of judicial impartiality. But as the night wore on and Francis detailed everything he had discovered from the microchip hidden in Detective Sullivan's watch, the judge's composure crumbled. "You don't understand what it's like," Harrison finally confessed at 1:17 a.m. "Crane has connections everywhere: the police department, City Hall, even the state attorney general's office." "Tell me about the Malone brothers," Francis pressed. "Tony and Vince Malone are enforcers for the Suarez cartel," Harrison explained, sweat beading on his forehead. "They executed your family on Crane's orders. Something about your wife seeing something she shouldn't have at the hospital where she worked." "And you knowingly sentenced an innocent man?" Harrison's voice broke. "I was just following orders. Crane controls half of the police department. No one dares to contradict him," the judge shouted, fear finally overwhelming his judicial dignity. For 97 minutes, Francis extracted a complete confession from Harrison, documenting how Crane had orchestrated the frame-up and how Harrison had accepted a $175,000 bribe deposited in an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. He forced Harrison to write a confession letter, detailing his corruption and role in Francis's wrongful conviction. After Harrison completed the letter, Francis executed him with a single shot to the temple, using the judge's own registered handgun. Next to Harrison's body, Francis left a manila envelope containing copies of evidence from Detective Sullivan's microchip, along with the recorded confession. The scene suggested a man consumed by guilt who could no longer live with his crimes. By 3:30 a.m., Francis had disappeared into the night, leaving behind what appeared to be another high-profile suicide in Detroit's legal community. Parker, a 34-year-old known for exposing corruption in city contracts, began examining Francis Jones's original case, reviewing court transcripts and interviewing witnesses overlooked during the initial investigation. She discovered numerous inconsistencies. On March 20, 2022, she published a front-page article titled, "Wrongfully Convicted: The Francis Jones Case Revisited." questioning both his guilt and the suspicious deaths of those involved in his prosecution. Meanwhile, Francis had already located his next targets. Intelligence gathered from both Sullivan and Harrison led him to the Knuckle Pit, an underground fighting venue operating beneath an abandoned auto parts factory in southwest Detroit. The illegal fight club, controlled by the Suarez cartel, served as a money laundering operation and entertainment venue for criminal elements. On March 24, 2022, during a high-stakes fighting event, Francis infiltrated the facility through a service entrance. At 11:33 p.m., he confronted the Malone brothers in a private office where they were counting the night's proceeds. In the ensuing confrontation, Francis engaged in a brutal hand-to-hand fight with both men. Tony Malone, 38, died from multiple stab wounds inflicted with his own knife. Vince Malone, 42, escaped despite suffering severe injuries, including a punctured lung and fractured jaw. Before leaving, Francis placed a family photograph in Tony's mouth, a snapshot taken at his daughter's 5th birthday party, just weeks before their murders. Police responded to reports of violence at 11:52 p.m., but Francis had already departed. They discovered Tony's body, the photograph, and signs of a violent struggle, but Vince had also fled the scene, leaving a trail of blood that ended at a service alley where tire marks indicated a rapid departure. The Suffolk County Police Department launched an internal investigation after Parker's article revealed inconsistencies in evidence handling. Detective Sergeant Raymond Ortiz, a 23-year veteran of the department, discovered that key evidence in the Jones case, including partial fingerprints found on the murder weapon, had been improperly catalogued. More disturbing was his finding that surveillance footage from the Joneses' neighborhood had been edited before submission to the prosecution. By March 18th, the investigation expanded to include Captain Victor Crane. Records showed Crane had signed off on numerous irregularities in cases connected to known associates of the Esposito cartel. Bank statements revealed suspicious deposits totaling $376,000 into an offshore account linked to Crane between 2019 and 2022. At his Beacon Hill penthouse, Crane made a frantic call to Diego Esposito on a prepaid phone. "The journalist is causing problems. The AG's office is reviewing everything," Crane said, his voice strained. Esposito, speaking from his estate in Wellesley, was direct. "Then make her stop. Use the team that handled the Jones situation. No loose ends this time." By March 21st, Esposito's enforcers, Hector Velez and Michael Fernandez, received their instructions. Their target, Angela Parker, 37, who lived alone in an apartment in Cambridge. Police records would later confirm that Velez and Fernandez had extensive criminal histories, with ties to multiple homicides across New England. Unknown to both Crane and Esposito, Francis Jones had been monitoring Crane for weeks. At 11:42 p.m. on March 22nd, as Velez and Fernandez approached Parker's third-floor apartment, Jones was already inside, explaining the risk to the journalist. When the enforcers breached the door using a hydraulic ram, Jones was prepared. The ensuing confrontation left Fernandez with a bullet in his shoulder and both assailants in custody. "Why did you save me?" "You're a criminal," Parker asked, visibly shaken as police secured the scene. Jones looked directly at her. "I'm a cop. I was and still will be a cop, and my job is to protect the innocent." Once the immediate danger passed, Parker revealed what her investigation had uncovered. 3 weeks before her murder, Letitia Jones, a surgical nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital, had witnessed an exchange between Crane and Esposito in the hospital's East Wing parking structure. According to Parker's sources, Letitia had accidentally recorded part of their conversation on her phone while taking a photo of a license plate she found suspicious. "They were discussing a shipment coming through Boston Harbor," Parker explained, showing Jones a partial transcript from the recovered audio. 40 kilos, at least $2.8 million in street value. Your wife didn't know what she had. With this information, Jones and Parker focused on locating Vince Malone, a mid-level distributor who had disappeared after the shipment was intercepted by a DEA operation unrelated to Crane's department. Through informants in South Boston, they tracked Malone to a motel in Revere on March 25th. The confrontation was violent. Malone, cornered and desperate, fired first, hitting Jones in the left shoulder. Despite the injury, Jones returned fire with precision, striking Malone twice in the chest. As emergency services responded to reports of gunfire, Malone lay bleeding on the motel room floor. "Crane paid us to frame you," Malone gasped. "They were afraid your wife would talk about what she saw, and they decided to frame you to shut your mouth forever." By the time paramedics arrived, Malone was dead. The digital recorder Jones had placed on the nightstand captured the entire confession. Francis arrived at 11:42 p.m., parking half a mile from the complex and approaching on foot. What Francis failed to realize was that Thomas Crane, a veteran detective with 2 decades of experience, had anticipated his arrival. Through an informant in the department still loyal to him, Crane learned that Francis had been making inquiries. He set a trap, positioning Esposito's men throughout the warehouse's cavernous interior. At 11:58 p.m., Francis entered through a loading dock door. The warehouse floor appeared empty, vast and hollow, with rusted machinery casting long shadows under the sparse emergency lights. He moved cautiously toward the central office area where thermal imaging had shown activity earlier in the day. "I wondered when you'd show up, Francis." Crane's voice echoed through the space. The lights suddenly blazed to life, revealing Crane standing on a metal catwalk above, surrounded by Esposito and 8 armed men. "Always the hero, aren't you?" Francis dove behind a concrete pillar as gunfire erupted. The tactical advantage was clearly with Crane's group, but what they hadn't counted on was Francis's military background and the desperation of a man with nothing to lose. The ensuing firefight lasted 17 minutes according to the official FBI report. Francis, displaying remarkable tactical skill, systematically eliminated 4 of Esposito's men while sustaining a bullet wound to his left shoulder and another grazing his ribs. Security footage recovered later showed him moving with methodical precision, using the warehouse's layout to his advantage. Sergio Esposito, the 43-year-old cartel lieutenant born in Juarez who had built the Red Hyenas into one of Detroit's most feared criminal organizations, attempted to flee when he realized the tide was turning. He made it to the northeast exit before Francis intercepted him. Their hand-to-hand combat lasted only moments. Francis, despite his injuries, overpowered Esposito and demanded information about Crane's corruption network. Before Esposito could respond, Crane appeared and shot him in the back of the head. "No loose ends," Crane said coldly as Esposito's body crumpled to the floor. Crane then turned his weapon on Francis, who had exhausted his ammunition. Blood pooling at his feet, Francis faced his former partner. "You know what your problem is, Francis," Crane said, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You still believe in something. In this city, that's a fatal weakness." The warehouse doors burst open. Tactical teams from the FBI's Detroit field office swarmed in, led by Special Agent Catherine Winters. "FBI, drop your weapons!" The expression on Crane's face transformed from triumph to shock. He hesitated just long enough for 2 agents to tackle him to the ground. What Francis hadn't known was that Angela Parker had gone to federal authorities 3 days earlier. The FBI had been building a case against the Red Hyenas cartel for 18 months, and saw in Francis's evidence the missing link to expose police corruption that had hampered their investigation. As Crane was handcuffed and led away, he locked eyes with Francis. "You're a dirty cop just like me. You've crossed the line," he shouted, struggling against his restraints. Francis, being attended to by paramedics, responded with quiet certainty. "The difference between us is that I know where the line is." The federal investigation that followed was one of the most comprehensive corruption probes in Detroit's history. The evidence compiled by Francis and Angela, financial records, phone logs, surveillance footage, and testimony from intimidated witnesses now willing to come forward, exposed a corruption network involving 17 police officers and 6 city officials. On April 29, 2024, Thomas Crane was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for multiple counts of murder, racketeering, and corruption. 5 other officers received sentences ranging from 12 to 25 years. But justice came at a price for Francis Jones as well. Though the investigation fully exonerated him of corruption charges and established that he had been framed, the fact remained that he had killed 4 people during his vigilante crusade. At his sentencing hearing on July 15, 2024, Judge Miranda Hoffman acknowledged the extraordinary circumstances but emphasized that no one is above the law. "Mr. Jones, While your intentions may have been to see justice done, we cannot condone taking the law into your own hands, she stated. Instead of the death penalty that such actions might normally warrant, Francis received 25 years with the possibility of parole after serving 1/3 of his sentence. As he was led from the courtroom, Angela Parker, who had been cleared of all charges and reinstated at the department with commendations, called out to him. Was it worth it? Francis Jones, the former decorated detective who had lost everything to expose the truth, paused and turned. Justice always comes with a price, he replied. Sometimes you have to be willing to pay it.